All right, so today we're taking a deep dive into a topic that's always been shrouded in mystery and intrigue.
Oh, yeah.
Freemasonry.
Yeah.
Specifically, is it a harmful secret society? To
Mm-hmm.
guide us through this, we're looking at the perspective of René Guénon,
Right.
this French philosopher and metaphysician.
Yeah, and I think what makes this deep dive particularly interesting is that, Guénon wasn't just some outside observer.
Right.
He was actually a Freemason himself.
Yeah, that definitely adds a layer of
Well, yeah.
complexity, I guess you could say, to
Exactly.
his analysis.
Yeah.
Before we get into, all the talk about harmful secret societies and all of that, can we unpack who Guénon was?
Yeah.
And his background a little bit?
Absolutely.
Because I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with his work.
Sure. So Guénon was really fascinated by esotericism
Okay.
and traditionalism.
Okay.
And he saw Freemasonry as this potential source of ancient wisdom.
Right.
But he was also critical of how modern Freemasonry,
Yeah.
particularly the kind of speculative branch, had strayed from its roots.
I'm already picking up on this key distinction between operative and speculative Freemasonry.
Right.
What's the difference?
So think of it this way.
Okay.
When we talk about operative Freemasons, we're talking about those medieval builders.
Yeah.
Those incredible cathedrals and amazing structures
Yeah.
that we still marvel at today.
Yeah.
Guénon believed that they had this authentic form of initiation,
Okay.
that their rituals and symbols were all tied to the act of building itself.
Wow.
It was like this transmission of sacred knowledge through their craft.
So it wasn't just about bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
It was like a spiritual connection
Yeah.
to the creation itself.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
But then we come to speculative Freemasonry, which emerged later, kind of in the 18th century.
Okay.
And this is the form that most people are familiar with today.
Right, with the lodges and the rituals.
Exactly, all that.
And all the things we hear about.
Yeah.
And Guénon wasn't a fan of this transition, was he?
Not really.
Okay.
He believed that while speculative Freemasonry might have kept some of the symbols
Right.
and the rituals, it had lost that connection to genuine spiritual transmission.
Okay.
For him, 1717 was a turning point.
Okay.
The Grand Lodge of London was founded.
Right.
And that kind of signified a move away from that
Okay.
older operative tradition.
So that's where things started to go downhill in Guénon's view.
Yeah, I think you could say that.
Right.
He saw the publishing of the Constitutions of Anderson in 1723
Okay.
as another step away from the true essence
Okay.
of Freemasonry.
And what was so problematic about them for him?
Well, he believed that they stripped away
Okay.
the esoteric and
Yeah.
sacred elements of Freemasonry, essentially rewriting history to make it a bit more palatable
Oh, interesting.
for a modern audience.
Wow.
He felt they transformed Freemasonry
Yeah.
from an initiatic path
Okay.
into more of a philosophical social club,
Got it.
which diminished
That's right.
its kind of spiritual weight.
So we're seeing that Guénon really views this modern Freemasonry as having deviated
Yeah.
quite a bit from its roots.
Yeah.
But is he saying that it's inherently bad?
It's not that straightforward. He
Okay.
actually kind of categorizes modern Freemasonry into 3 tiers.
Okay.
There are some lodges, though he says they're rare,
Right.
still kind of hold on to that
Right.
authentic initiation.
Okay.
Others have been reduced to more philosophical societies
Okay.
with no real spiritual transmission going on.
Right.
But it's the 3rd tier that I think raises a lot of red flags for him.
And this is where we get into the
Yeah.
kind of the heart of that question of the harmful secret society. How
Exactly.
does that 3rd tier look like?
So this is the category that includes lodges that have really embraced occultism,
Okay.
political agendas,
Okay.
or even societal subversion.
Wow.
He's suggesting that they might be using their influence for kind of nefarious purposes.
Wow. Okay.
Rather than for genuine spiritual development.
So is he saying that there are Masonic lodges out there that are intentionally
Well,
trying to undermine society?
it's important to remember that he's not saying that all Freemasons are bad.
Right.
Or that all lodges have these intentions.
Okay.
But he does suggest that certain lodges, especially those that have been heavily influenced by the occult,
Right.
might be involved in what he calls counter-initiation.
Counter-initiation.
Yeah.
That sounds a
It does, doesn't it?
little ominous. Yeah. What does that actually mean?
Basically, it's deliberate inversion of traditional spiritual principles.
Okay.
So imagine taking that path
Right.
of spiritual development
Yep.
and twisting it to achieve kind of the opposite effect.
Oh, wow.
Instead of leading to enlightenment, it
Yeah.
leads to, potentially manipulation, control,
Right.
or even spiritual degeneration.
So Guénon is suggesting here that
Yeah.
these certain Masonic branches are using these symbols
Right.
and rituals
Uh-huh.
not for good,
Right.
but for potentially harmful
Yeah.
purposes.
Yeah.
Counter-initiation is That's a big accusation.
It is a pretty serious thing to suggest,
Yeah.
and to make it even a bit more complicated.
Okay.
Guénon acknowledges that there are Jewish influences within Freemasonry.
Right. And that's a
That's a sensitive topic.
very sensitive topic.
Yeah.
And knowing, the history of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories
Yeah,
that
yeah.
surround Freemasonry, I'm curious how Guénon approached that aspect.
Well, he was very, very clear in separating his views from anything that would be considered anti-Semitic.
Okay.
He recognized the influence of Kabbalah
Yeah.
and symbolism related to the Temple of Solomon within Freemasonry.
Right. So Jewish mystical traditions
Yeah.
and a pretty significant
Yeah.
structure in that tradition.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But he saw Kabbalah as a valid tradition.
Right.
When it's understood
Right.
and practiced in the right way.
Okay.
His critique wasn't about the presence of those influences,
Okay.
but rather it was about their potential
Right.
misappropriation or misuse,
Okay.
especially in lodges that were leaning more towards occultism.
So it's not the influence itself, it's
Right.
how it's being used.
Right. It's the context.
Yeah.
It's the
And
understanding.
using these powerful symbols
Yeah,
without that knowledge can be
absolutely. That can be dangerous.
right. Yeah.
And this kind of leads us to another major concern that Guénon had,
Right.
which is the mingling of politics
Right.
with Freemasonry.
Okay.
He was a big advocate for keeping those two realms separate.
Okay. So he was very much against
Yeah.
having Freemasonry be political in any way.
He thought it should be purely focused on the spiritual.
But from what I understand, historically,
Right.
it hasn't always been that way.
Yeah.
I mean, there are connections to things like the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And all of that. How did
Right.
he reconcile that?
He believed that any involvement in politics would corrupt
Okay.
the true purpose of
Okay.
Freemasonry.
Got it.
He saw lodges that got wrapped up in political matters
Right.
as basically straying from that spiritual core
Yeah.
and becoming kind of tools for ideology,
Right.
for gaining power.
So keeping that separation between the spiritual and the political
Yeah,
was crucial for him.
absolutely crucial.
Okay. And wasn't he also critical of the
He was,
anti-clericalism that was present in
yeah.
Freemasonry,
Oh, very much so.
especially towards the Catholic Church?
Yes, he saw that as another sign that Freemasonry had
Yeah.
really deviated.
From its true path.
Yeah.
Where did he kind of pinpoint the origin
Well,
of that anti-clerical sentiment?
he pointed to a couple of things. The first being
Yeah.
the Constitutions of Anderson, which we talked about.
Right.
Remember, those kind of shifted Freemasonry away from its Christian roots
Yeah.
and into this more universal approach.
Right. More inclusive.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
while that might seem well-intentioned,
Right.
Guénon argued that it actually kind of opened the door for
Okay.
skepticism
Okay.
and, in some cases, hostility towards organized religion
Wow.
and especially Catholicism.
So it's not that inclusivity is bad.
Right.
It's just that,
It's about those unforeseen consequences
yeah.
of that shift
Okay.
and how it potentially strained that relationship
Yeah.
between Freemasonry and religion.
Well, makes sense.
He also connected this anti-clericalism to the Enlightenment
Oh.
and the French Revolution,
Right.
both of which championed reason
Yeah.
and individual liberty,
Right.
and often positioned themselves in opposition to the church.
And we see that reflected
Yeah,
in some of these Masonic lodges
yeah,
that embrace those ideals.
right.
But Guénon presented some
Yeah,
pretty strong arguments against this anti-clericalism within Freemasonry.
he did.
What were his main points?
So, for starters, he argued that it represented this break from Western tradition.
Okay.
And, Christianity is a
Right.
pretty fundamental part of
Okay.
that tradition.
Okay.
He believed that Freemasonry, in its purest form,
Yeah.
was connected to that broader tradition.
Okay.
He also saw it as this kind of profane reaction,
Right.
fueled by political ideology,
Right.
rather than genuine spiritual seeking.
So he's saying that it's a distraction from that spiritual
All right.
core.
Yeah, exactly. It shifts the focus
Yeah.
onto these kind of worldly concerns.
Interesting.
And lastly, and this is where it gets a bit
Yeah.
unsettling, he suggests that this anti-clericalism might actually be playing into the hands
Okay.
of those who are seeking to undermine traditional spiritual structures altogether.
Wow. So is he implying that there are groups out there that are intentionally using Freemasonry
It's hard to say.
to weaken the influence of religion?
He doesn't go into specifics,
Right.
but he does.
He hints at it.
Yeah, he hints at that possibility.
Wow.
He saw the potential for organizations like Freemasonry to be manipulated
Yeah.
and used for goals that go beyond their stated aims.
That's a pretty
It's
unsettling thought.
it is a bit unsettling
Yeah.
to consider.
So are we saying that Guénon believes all of modern Freemasonry is
Yeah.
like evil or dangerous?
I don't think that's what he's saying at all.
Okay.
He presents a much more nuanced perspective.
Yeah.
It's not about condemning Freemasonry as a whole,
Right.
but it is about recognizing that it has this potential for both good and bad,
Right.
depending on the influences at play,
Okay.
within specific lodges and branches.
So it's more about
Yeah.
understanding the nuance and recognizing that Freemasonry isn't this
It's not a monolith.
one big
Yeah.
shit entity.
Exactly.
Okay.
But to really understand Guénon's critique, we need to delve deeper into that moment of transition
Okay.
from operative to speculative Freemasonry.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning
Yeah.
and unpack what made that operative Freemasonry so special
Yeah.
in Guénon's eyes.
Okay, so remember, those operative Freemasons were master builders,
Yeah.
creating those incredible cathedrals and structures.
Right,
Guénon believed that their work, it wasn't just about technical skill,
right.
but that it reflected a deep understanding
Okay.
of sacred geometry, symbolism, even cosmology.
So their process of building
Uh,
was infused with
yeah.
a spiritual dimension.
Yes, it was a way for them to connect to something greater than themselves.
Wow.
Their tools, their rituals, these weren't just symbolic.
Okay.
They were instruments
Okay.
for transmitting ancient wisdom, connecting them to a lineage
That's amazing.
of knowledge that stretched back centuries.
It really makes you wonder
Yeah.
if we've lost something in our
Yeah.
modern approach.
I think about that a lot
Yeah.
to architecture.
Yeah, to building in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating.
It is.
But it brings us back to Guénon's concerns
Right.
about that shift
Yeah,
to speculative Freemasonry.
exactly.
So during that transition, what happened?
Okay, well,
What did he see as the main problem?
if you remember, the founding of the Grand Lodge of London in 1717,
Right.
that was a significant change because
Yeah.
it marked a move away from Freemasonry as being a purely operative craft.
Okay.
So it opened it up
Right.
to men who weren't builders.
So it became more of an
Yeah.
intellectual or philosophical pursuit.
Exactly,
Okay.
rather than a hands-on,
Yeah.
craft-based tradition.
Right.
And while intellectual pursuits are valuable,
Right.
Guénon saw this as the point where Freemasonry
Yeah.
started to detach from those deeper, more esoteric
Okay.
sources of knowledge.
So it was a shift from a direct experience,
Yeah.
embodied knowledge,
Yeah.
to something more.
To a more abstract
Yeah.
theoretical understanding.
Yeah, I like that.
And this shift
Okay.
was cemented by the constitutions of Anderson
Right.
in 1723.
We keep coming back to these
Right.
these constitutions.
Yeah, I mean, they laid the groundwork
Yeah.
for this new speculative Freemasonry,
Right.
emphasizing those moral and philosophical
Okay.
dimensions.
And as we were talking about earlier,
yeah,
this is where Guénon sees
yeah,
a major break
a real rupture.
with tradition.
Yeah.
He was pretty critical of them.
He believed that it was an attempt to rewrite Masonic history,
Oh, wow.
stripping away
Yeah.
those more esoteric elements
Yeah.
and presenting a more rationalized version.
Right, for a modern. So he's saying that, despite the fact that there are these symbols and rituals,
Yeah.
speculative Freemasonry
Uh-huh.
became
Yeah.
more of a social club.
It became more about the social aspects,
Yeah.
more about the philosophy
Right.
than a path to genuine spiritual development.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. He believed that a lot of spiritual and esoteric traditions were susceptible to these kinds of patterns of, deviation and decline.
Especially in the face of modernity, right?
Especially in the modern world, yeah.
So it's not just about Freemasonry in isolation.
It's a bigger picture.
It's about recognizing that there are these challenges
Yeah.
that these traditional spiritual paths face.
In a world that's increasingly secular,
Right, materialistic,
Christianization.
focused on rationality.
Absolutely. All of that.
He saw this tendency for those traditions to become diluted or even co-opted for purposes that were contrary to their original aims.
It's almost like this kind of, I don't know, like a shadow force that's working against these
He actually used the term counter-tradition.
counter-tradition.
Yeah, to describe that.
It's like this force that's trying to mimic and distort the real thing.
Yeah, it twists the meaning, the purpose.
Wow.
And he believed that counter-tradition was very active in the modern world, using all sorts of methods to create confusion, to erode those traditional values. That's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is.
So is he suggesting that there are groups or individuals who are intentionally working to undermine spirituality?
He doesn't point fingers or name names.
Right.
But he does suggest that there are forces operating in opposition.
So it's not just random chaos or tradition naturally fading away.
It's more deliberate.
There's an intentionality behind it.
There's an agenda there. Yeah.
Wow. And, it makes you think about how we're bombarded with all this stuff today.
Right.
Consumerism,
Materialism,
technology.
instant gratification.
You know, it's almost like we've lost sight of those bigger questions.
We're constantly distracted, pulled in different directions.
About meaning, about purpose.
And that creates a perfect environment for those counter-traditional forces to thrive.
It's like they feed off of
Yeah, they feed off our anxiety.
our anxiety.
Our distractions, our desire.
Our desire for quick fixes.
Yeah, easy answers.
Right, right.
And I think Guénon is really urging us to become aware of those influences.
So he's not just criticizing.
He's challenging us.
He's challenging us to wake up.
To wake up, to be more discerning.
Right, to not be seduced by
Not get caught up in the trends.
the trends.
Or look for those superficial solutions.
Yeah, so it's about really committing
to a genuine spiritual path.
to that path of inner transformation.
Yeah, seeking wisdom from those traditions that have stood the test of time.
So it's about discernment, right?
Discernment is key.
Being able to sift through all of the
Yeah, there's a lot out there.
noise,
A lot of noise.
and figure out what's authentic
What's real.
and what's just
What's superficial.
superficial.
And that takes effort.
It does.
It takes study, reflection,
Right.
a willingness to
To
question.
really engage.
Yeah, it's not a passive thing.
It's not has
No, you have to actively seek it out.
And I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways from Guénon.
Yeah.
That emphasis on connecting with a genuine spiritual tradition.
It's not about just gabbling in different things.
It's about finding a path
A path, yeah, a real path,
Right.
not just a collection of ideas.
that offers a framework,
A framework for understanding
Right.
the world, your place in it.
a map.
And a map.
Especially in this world where we're just bombarded with so much information.
Right, so much noise, so many different
It's
perspectives.
different ideology.
Yeah.
It's hard to shift through all of that.
And Guénon's work, I think, provides some tools
Yeah,
to help us do that.
yeah, it really
It's a way to
is.
cut through the noise.
It cuts through the
And
noise.
find those deeper truths.
Yeah, those timeless truths.
Yeah.
This has been a really, really fascinating exploration of Guénon's thoughts on Freemasonry.
It's been a pleasure talking about it with you.
It's been really eye-opening.
Yeah, he's a complex thinker.
He is, but there's so much depth
A lot to unpack.
to his work.
There is.
And it really makes you think
Yeah, it makes you think about your own path.
about your own journey,
Yeah, where we're going.
where we're going as a society,
And the challenges we face.
challenges we face.
That we face along the way.
Yeah, and the choices we make.
It's a lot to ponder.
A lot to ponder.
Thank you for taking us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.